All right, welcome everybody to another episode of This Week in Legal Blogging presented by LexBlog. This is Bob Ambrogi. I am a blogger in my own right at Law Sites Blog, and this is where we speak to lawyers who blog, who are prominent legal bloggers, about why they do it, how they do it, how they keep at it, and much more. Today, we are going to be speaking with J. Scott Key of the Georgia Criminal Appellate Law blog. Scott, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing real well. Thanks so much for doing this. And let me just, before we go any farther, remind our listeners that this will be recorded and available on YouTube at youtube.com/LexBlog, where you can find our whole series. We've done several weeks worth of this so far, and we're going to keep at it for a while. So Scott, I'd like to just start by asking guests how they're doing in this crazy time, apart from blogging and lawyering and everything else we do.
Doing pretty well. If there's ever a form of law that you can practice during a pandemic, and I never thought I'd have to think about that sort of thing before, it's appellate. You can e-file everything, your transcripts, you can just read from anywhere. So appellate practice sort of lends itself to a pandemic, it turns out. So everything's been great over here. I feel like I can catch up a little bit these days.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Just getting caught up and whatnot. Before we get to your blog, I have to say I was looking at your background, and we have in common that we were both English majors as undergraduates, and I like that you also worked on your school newspaper, your school's literary magazine. So you've got the writing is in you somewhere already, I guess, huh?
Somewhere, deep,
Somewhere.
very deep.
No, but do you think it's helped you with blogging over the years that you had a background in literature and English?
I think it absolutely does. I've written a bunch of papers and, enjoy the written word, enjoy writing. So I think enjoying it is probably as big, if not bigger than aptitude, for sure.
And you also had a major in theology, and you in fact got a Master of Divinity degree in addition before going to law school. So how did you get from studying English and theology to becoming a criminal lawyer?
I as a college student, I always thought I was headed to law school. And I don't think I ever thought I wasn't headed to law school. I ended up taking a double major in religion as an undergrad and loved the coursework so much that I wanted to continue studying in that. And I think at some point in time, I thought I was going to go on and be a religion professor. Third year of law school, I cross-registered. I went to Emory. I cross-registered a class that you could get credit for either in the law school or in the theology school. And really, that rekindled my thoughts about going to law school. So then I ended up just going from there to law. The criminal part, I'm not really sure. I think it's just because I interned at a criminal defense firm, and criminal defense attorneys don't like to write, and they figured out at the firm I was in that I like to write, and I started doing all their appellate work, and that's kind of how all of that started.
So has your practice almost continuously been mostly appellate, or have you also done the trial work as well?
I've done some trial work. I may jury try one or two a year. Like I did a federal drug conspiracy in the Middle District of Georgia 2 summers ago, and then in that same summer, I did a pretty significant, very medically intense child abuse case. So I may do 3 or 4 in a year, and I may go stretches of a year or more where I don't try a case. Yeah. But for every trial I'll do, I may do 5 or 6 oral arguments at the appellate court. So I'm definitely more of an appellate lawyer than a trial lawyer, but I do some trial work still.
Yeah. And did I read on your blog that you're starting to cross over into a little bit of civil work as well?
I'm starting to pivot into some personal injury work. And I've done that at the appellate level for a couple of years, and I'm gonna pivot to that probably in a bigger way in the next couple of months to years.
So that's a new blog you'll have to start.
Yeah, I have to do two. I have to not keep up with two blogs.
Good. So interestingly, and this is the second week in a row this has happened. If I have it right, we are almost like a week or so within the 10th birthday of your blog. It looks like your blog started in July 10 years ago last week. Does that sound right?
Now that you say it, it sounds right, but I can't imagine I've been doing this for 10 years.
Well, I've got July 2010 was the first post I could see in your blog. So 10 years ago. So why, looking back 10 years ago, why did you get started down this road of blogging?
10 years ago, it was almost exclusively marketing related. I wanted to have more of a web presence, and I wanted it to be a thing that I used for marketing. And I'll just tell you, that's definitely changed. The reasons why I blog have gotten a lot more complicated from then. But certainly it was a pure marketing motive at the time. But it's since become much more than that.
Yeah. So when it was a pure marketing motive, when you started out, who were you marketing to? Were you marketing to other lawyers to get appellate work from them, or are you marketing to criminal defendants?
I thought that I was marketing direct clients when I started blogging. I learned over time that I was really marketing to other lawyers that would act as referral sources. And I have found over time that those clients who have found me on the internet without it being mediated through a referral generally are not great clients. Sometimes they are, but generally what I've learned is it's definitely something that I now aim toward other lawyers and not so much directly to clients. The value in the sense of clients finding me, I think it's not a great I mean, clients will find you that way, but maybe not the right clients for you. Where I find that the blog is very helpful to me with clients is if they already have my name from some other source, if they've already been referred to me, they're already looking into me for whatever reason. I find that the blog and the body of work that I've built, having blogged now, I guess, for a decade, is the clients get to know who I am. They get to know how I think. They get to know how I approach things, how I solve problems. And they get to learn a little bit about me. And they get to learn a lot about the process from looking at that body of work. So where it's helpful for marketing is I think it gives me some credibility when people who have already heard about me are trying to learn more about me.
I mean, I think that's a really key value of a blog. I think you just put your finger on it, because it's not just fluff that you're writing on a web page. It's stuff that you're writing that demonstrates your knowledge of a particular topic. It tells something about who you are and what you know. Does that make sense
absolutely.
to you? Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll tell you now, I feel like now it's more, if something's bothering me in the middle of the night that I want to just get out on paper, the blog is a really good place to try to figure out what I think about things. So I'd say now, whenever I write a blog, whenever I write a post, I feel like the body of work is there. It's all there. It accumulates. But for me, it's now a place where I can sort of work out my thoughts on topics. I think I now blog for me more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. A couple of things you just said that I want to follow up on. One, it's funny because I just came across a post on your blog where I think you said something like, "Excuse me, I'm writing this at 2:00 in the morning" or something. Excuse the typo. So, I know how that goes. Although I tend to I'll jot something down on a piece of paper and then I'll get up in the morning and write it down. I don't actually get up and do the writing, but something about the head working in the middle of the night that you need to get it out sometimes. But you talk about how you've changed over the years in the kinds of stuff you're writing about. So tell us more about that. I mean, how has that evolved for you?
I think at the very beginning, it was my motive was, okay, how can I connect directly with clients? I think the more you are like that, the less credible your blogging is. Because, we've all seen those blogs where people are like, their blog post is top 5 things you should do if you've been in an accident, and all of that looks, I don't know, maybe scammy is too bad of a word to use, but that doesn't look very, that doesn't look very authentic.
Yeah. And they probably didn't write it either.
And they probably didn't really write it themselves.
Yeah.
But now it is, for instance, I'm here in the middle of the South. I'm in the Atlanta area. I'm in a small town. My office is in a small town. The Confederate Memorial on the square that is literally, you could walk out my door and see it, is coming down in a few weeks. And, the last blog post I wrote was reflecting on what it means to have practiced law your entire career, and you've walked by one of those Confederate monuments in just about every courthouse you've ever walked into and never really thought about that. Right. And so my latest blog post is a reflection on Confederate monuments and their proximity to courthouses and what that all means as a lawyer that practices. And so I did that was one of those middle of the night blog posts. So I think now it's me trying to get just some thoughts on paper to figure out what I believe about certain things, more so than it is. It's definitely more a conversation with myself. I hope that it helps other people as well, but it's much more an internal thing now than it used to be. Yeah.
A blog post, by the way, in which maybe your English major roots come through, because you quote Faulkner in there, and I don't know how many lawyers are quoting Faulkner in their blog posts, but that's a good thing.
Well,
did you get response?
It is the South.
Well, that's true. It is the South too. Did you get respond? Do you get, when you write posts like that? Do you get feedback? Do you hear from people about that?
I do hear back from people about that, who will, I didn't think about it that way before. Or like, you really made me think about this topic. So yeah, I'll get colleagues that'll give me a ring. Believe it or not, I'll even have judges that'll call me up about things that I've written, or who I'll see at an event back when we used to have events, who will talk to me about some blog post. So yeah, definitely I'll get, and I tend to get more feedback on the non-explicitly legal blog posts that I do than those that are just, hot and heavy talking about a case or about the practice of law.
Yeah, I think it's really funny that it's really hard to predict what kind of a blog post will get the most reaction or the most feedback. I mean, sometimes the ones that I've written that I think would be the least likely to generate a big response, or maybe the most off topic for me, are sometimes the ones that just, are the ones that hit a nerve somewhere and just get that much more response. So it's interesting you say that. And you just mentioning judges. Do you still? I saw it in your bio. I don't know if this is still current, that you teach a course with Judge Stephen Dillard.
I do. Yeah,
he's no stranger to social media himself.
No, he's not. He and I teach, and we've done it 2 years in a row, and we're hoping the law school will invite us back. We teach Georgia Appellate Practice and Procedure. We co-teach that class every spring at Mercer Law School, and he's so much fun to teach a class with. Good friend, so yeah, Judge Dillard and I teach together.
Yeah, I think he won some Twitter Personality of the Year award or something like that.
I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah. So, you started out sort of with one idea in mind for why you wanted to be blogging. It's evolved over the years. What about in terms of your own career? Do you think that having been doing this blog for 10 years has had an impact on your career in any way? And if so, what impact has it had?
So I think the impact has been that it's a place I can go to clarify my thinking. It's a place I can go to think out loud, to write about topics that, where you can get if you're a lawyer and you practice particularly in one type of law, you can get a tunnel vision where all you're ever doing is writing briefs and motions and letters. And I do think it gives me a literary outlet to develop my writing beyond a very constricted sense of developing my writing. I think it's been really good for that. I think it's been good for me to build over time a body of work that a potential client can look to get to know me. I think it's had a tremendous impact. You know, it's interesting to be in front of a judge who on a break will say, you know, hey, I loved your, you know, I read your blog and I really like this post that you did last week about, you know, whatever. You know, the local NPR affiliate in Atlanta a couple of years ago decided that they wanted for a couple of weeks in the summer to do a roundup of precedent from the Supreme Court. And I was invited to come and do commentary on public radio, you know, a few weeks in a row. So, you know, I think I've had opportunities like that from doing a blog post. I've had reporters, you know, reach out to me as an expert in a particular field of law to, you know, sometimes on the record, sometimes off the record to help them with a story they're working on. So I think it's been an interesting conduit with the press. So I think it really has opened doors for me that probably, you know, may not have been opened otherwise.
Yeah, again, I mean, that's, you know, a theme we hear over and over again. I mean, it's funny because, as a matter of fact, just last week, the guest we had on the show was talking about the exact same thing, that NPR had reached out to her when they were doing a story on something because they had found her through her blog and read what she was writing about and gotten in contact with her. And the other point that you just made is about kind of you know, stretching your writing muscles, I guess, in a sense. I mean, obviously you were literary, you were a writer before you started even becoming a lawyer, but so many lawyers get stuck into a way of writing that is so formal and rigid. And you know, I wonder if, as an appellate lawyer, you know, you have probably feel like you have certain constrictions you have to follow in writing briefs and in doing your formal legal writing. And you know, do you think that by blogging that helps you in your legal writing?
It absolutely cross-pollinates. I mean, I think it absolutely. I think because I think a blogging voice is very different from you know, from an advocate's voice.
Right.
You know, at the edges. But I do think that in doing a law blog, you have to be you want to be informal and relatable, but I think you want to write with some authority as well. And I think the sort of informality, because you know, you can make a blog post wherever you want to make it, and I think the creative side of blogging definitely, particularly in crafting a statement of facts, I think it definitely works the other direction, and it keeps my writing muscles a little bit more creative when I'm writing a brief, because there's enormous room for creativity and expression and writing in a particular style that's your own in legal briefing. That, you know, if you're not careful, you'll just write like every other lawyer that writes legal briefs, or you'll, you know, like I'll have lawyers call me and they're writing a motion for whatever, and they'll say, "Do you have a motion for whatever?" And, you know, my response is, "Well, have you ever thought about just opening Microsoft Word up and styling something motion and just write it? Have you ever thought about just?" I mean, and so I think I think lawyers tend to borrow bad writing from each other.
Yeah.
And I have less of a tendency to go from a form because I'm writing in this other outlet than I think I would otherwise do.
Yeah, and I bet that makes your brief writing much more effective. I mean, you know, judges are readers too, and I'm sure that something creative. Well, we've all seen examples of super creative briefs from time to time that have either crashed and burned, or that have been highly successful. But you know, I'm sure judges, like any other reader, kind of get bored with the same old stuff all the time coming across their
imagine your job every day is to open up, you know, a bunch of things that are on your desk that start off "comes now the defendant heretofore." You know, just imagine just having to read that all day long, all the time. I mean, you don't.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound fun.
Yeah. So some lawyers that I talk to who are either just getting into blogging or who are thinking about getting into blogging often find the very aspect that you're talking about it to be somewhat daunting. The idea of how do they begin to not write like a lawyer, or how do they begin to develop a voice as a blogger? What would you recommend? What advice do you have to offer somebody who's just trying to develop that voice?
Well, you'll get that voice with practice. And so, you may not be great at it the first, 10 or 15 that you do. You may not, you may not know how to do it yet. I think number one, take the pressure off of yourself. A blog post is it's kind of a journal that you're sharing with the public. So, it can't be like your diary. You need to be really careful about that. And you don't want to overshare because it is a professional setting.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you're not filing this with the Supreme Court. You're not handing this to your literature professor. You don't, every blog post doesn't have to, in fact, your blog posts don't need to be, some big sprawling document because no one's going to read that. You can write a couple of paragraphs and they're great. You look at a blogger outside of the legal context, like a Seth Godin. And he's probably written every single day for the past 15 years. But most of his blog posts are a paragraph or two. Sometimes his blog posts are a sentence or two. Sometimes they're really lengthy blog posts. But what I would say to lawyers is your blog posts don't have to be a masterpiece. But the more you do it, the more fun it will be. And I think the other thing is, if you're thinking about marketing, if you're thinking about getting more clients, if you're thinking about getting better cases, you're thinking about building your reputation, I think you're probably focused on the wrong things. I think those things are the results of blogging, but ultimately you should write your blog for you. It should be something that's yours, whose audience is you. And I think if you do that, and if you're authentic, if you're not writing what you think a client or a judge wants to hear, but you're writing to express who you are, to get some idea out that you'd like to sort of see on paper, I think you'll find that as a side benefit, all those results will come.
I feel like we should just stop this interview right now. I mean, I think you've just summed up everything I believe about blogging. I mean, that's so important. And I think what happens sometimes with lawyers is, maybe it has to do with the motivation for why they're blogging. And as you said, if they're doing it because of marketing, if they think they should be, or maybe somebody in their firm is telling them they should be doing it, I think that makes it a lot harder for them. I think there has to be, passion may be too strong of a word, but you have to have some degree of really investing yourself in it, wanting to be doing it. It has to be something that you're personally motivated to want to do, I think. And you can't just be doing it because someone in your firm says, we're designating you as our official blogger, and now go to it, bring in business.
Well, and I think the world, and I know there's a zillion blogs. There's a zillion blogs that people start and they do it for a couple of months and they never blog again. Right. But this is going to maybe be controversial, but I think the world needs more good bloggers. I think, and I think particularly in the era of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, I think in the era of social media, and social media is a good supplement to blogging, but I think there's a lot of very thin conversations where people are talking past each other and shouting at each other on the internet, that when you blog, even if it's for just a couple of paragraphs, you're developing a thought from start to finish in a way that you don't do on Twitter with your character limitations, in a way that you don't do on Facebook that's sort of designed to get people at each other. I think there's a value to a thoughtful expression in the written form that you don't necessarily get. Now, Facebook can be a great place to share your blog post, but there's something about blogging that I think is missing even though we're probably communicating with each other on social media, on the internet more than ever before, I don't know how meaningful it is these days. And blogging is a little different from all of that.
Well, you're speaking to people from LexBlog, so it's not going to be controversial here for you to say there should be more bloggers. We're all for that idea, and never let it be said otherwise. But how do you maintain or perpetuate that conversation? I mean, once you develop a rapport with readers, once you develop readers, as you say, we're not on Twitter, not Facebook. How do you interact with them? How do you maintain that relationship?
Well, sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I really don't know
right.
the impact that it had. The other thing that I used to do all the time, and I stopped doing, is I used to always want to look at my numbers. I used to always want to look at the analytics on my blog. And I would just tell you, if you're starting off for like the first year, maybe two, just don't look at that stuff. Because you'll get depressed. I mean, you'll get depressed. I mean, probably if I look now, I might be depressed. I don't know. I will take, maybe if my blog gets one reader and that reader is a justice on the Supreme Court somewhere, that's the reader I needed. Right. Or if that reader is a lawyer that's going to refer me a great case, maybe that's the one reader that I needed. But how do I keep the conversation going? I'll link out my blog posts generally to Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, and that'll help distribute it and sort of increase awareness. But a lot of times I won't know. A lot of times a year will go by, and I'll see somebody at a bar event, and they'll go, "I really like that post you wrote about," and it may be something I vaguely remember. So a lot of times you don't know the conversation that you've started. But sometimes people will just call me up and they'll have read something. So a lot of times you're just throwing it out there. It's like the proverbial letter on a bottle, and you just don't know. Right. You don't know.
Right. And it's not about how many people are reading your blog. It's about who's reading your blog ultimately, and are you reaching the audience that you're hoping to reach in some way, and making an impact on them, or at least being felt by them. Mm-hmm. I think I've picked up that maybe you're not blogging with the same frequency you once blogged from some of your posts recently.
No, not at all.
But so where do you get ideas, and how do you decide when to write and what to write about?
Usually the idea comes from something that makes me mad, or something that or something that I'm deeply worried about, or something I don't know what I think about. And so literally, I think now I blog if something's really bothering me at some level, and I want to work it out, and I want to work it out on the page. So if you look at my most recent post about the whole Confederate Memorial thing, the Confederate Monument thing, that was me trying to think through some ideas. So generally now there's something I just have to get out on paper. No, I think if you're starting a blog, so I don't have the luxury of doing that because I've been blogging for 10 years.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of posts there. So if you want to figure out how I think, or what I think, or how I approach the world, I think you'll probably get that from my blog posts, over 10 years. So I probably should be writing more frequently than I am. But I think now I blog when I feel like I need to.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you still blogging about Georgia criminal appellate law?
I am. Yeah, I am. I wrote a blog about sovereign immunity a little bit ago, and a case will come out. Yeah,
I actually read that with interest. It's a big issue right now in a lot of states, but in Massachusetts right now, where I'm a lobbyist and part of my job, and we're dealing with that very issue. So.
So legal topics will certainly still strike my fancy. Teaching a class, a lot of times the student will ask something and it'll prompt some idea. So generally, sometimes if a lawyer calls and asks you a question about something they're struggling with, as long as you can make it kind of, as long as you're not revealing facts, a lot of times ideas for posts will come from just things I deal with, or, some case I'll come upon. The great thing about practicing law is you have no shortage, particularly if you're a criminal defense attorney, you have no shortage of interesting, weird stories. Like every day, something weird happens that you can write about.
Right. Do you ever write about your own cases?
Only if it's a published case, and it sets some precedent. So in other words, if it's already out there, it's already setting a precedent. If it's a case I'm working on, no, I won't do that, because the client doesn't need to be made a character in my blog. And so I will write about a case if it's a published opinion and it establishes some precedent, but I'm not going to go inside baseball about that unless it's like some writing technique or some technical thing, or unless it was something that was already kind of public. I'm very, very careful about writing about my cases because I think the client deserves, not to be part of it. And I think if it's ever borderline, I'll ask.
Yeah.
I'll ask the client first, but I generally stray away from that.
Yeah, you talked about putting your personality into your writing. Any other tips on writing a blog post, on what makes a successful blog post in your mind, or a readable blog post?
I think maybe you can take the pressure off of yourself and pretend that you're writing an email to a friend. In other words, like no one ever gets writer's block when they're writing an email to a buddy. People don't tend to get writer's block when they're doing a post on Facebook. So I think take the formality out of it, at least in the first draft. Give yourself permission to write a terrible first draft. I think just if you can sort of reframe it and like, you know what, I'm going to write this like it's an email to a buddy. Sometimes that helps take the pressure off. So I think you can be, as long as you're professional, as long as you have a professional voice and you're not oversharing. I think that you don't, a blog doesn't have to be formal. And it doesn't have to be a lengthy post. So you just take the pressure off of yourself, and it can be ideally, it probably should be just a couple of paragraphs.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea of giving yourself permission to write a crappy first draft. I just in my own writing, I don't do a lot of redrafting actually, but I'll often write something maybe at night before I'm going to post it the next morning. I'll go back the next morning and I'll read it and I'll say, it's just boring as hell. And I'll completely rewrite it just because I'm looking at it almost as a reader, by the next morning. And I just realized I've just written a really boring blog post. So there is something to be said for just revisiting it, I think.
Sometimes I'll even write it in longhand. Like I love fountain pens. So sometimes I'll just write it out on.
You are a writer.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'll collect fountain pens. So sometimes I'll just write it out in longhand and then I'll type it up. Yeah. So you can always do that.
Yeah. Any other advice to somebody who's new to blogging, just starting out in blogging, even just thinking about blogging, other than sort of writing style per se? I know we've talked about personality and passion, but anything else that you'd offer by way of advice?
Find some blogs that you like. They don't even have to be in law. Maybe half of them shouldn't be in law. That have open comments, and maybe get started going on some other blogs for some people that you like or you admire, and comment on their blog posts. And I think maybe reading a lot is as important. And then, because it's a dialogue, blog ultimately is a dialogue. And so get in the habit of going out and finding some blogs that you enjoy and comment on those blog posts. And then maybe you don't even have to invent posts yourself. I mean, literally, you could find some blogger that you disagree with and go, Scott Key said on this blog post, whatever, about Confederate monuments. I think he's a moron. Like, I totally disagree with Scott Key, and here's why. And then link Scott Key and hope that he comments on you. And you don't have to have an original idea ever. You can just sort of comment on other people's.
Yeah. Not to put you on the spot, but any one or two blogs that you really like to read that you'd mention?
Well, so I mentioned Seth Godin, to not not a law blogger, and anybody that does criminal is reading Scott Greenfield. Simple
Yeah.
Justice. That's like that. I love reading some Greenfield. I disagree with him a good bit of the time, but I love Scott Greenfield. I think he's a great writer. I love his blogging voice, and I'll look at Greenfield probably every day.
A great writer, and he's an example of what you just said, in the sense he's often just riffing off of something in the news or something else that somebody else wrote or something like that. He's often reacting in his blog post to something that got him angry, kind of like you. But yeah, he's a great writer and a prolific one as well. Well, Scott, I really appreciate any final words before we wrap up. Any words of wisdom you want to share?
No, thanks so much for the opportunity to come in. And you're like a blogging titan yourself. So it's an honor to be talking to you today, and enjoyed having this conversation.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to get to know you and talk to you. And I look forward to continuing to follow your blog and watch for the next thing that gets you up in the middle of the night. And
it'll happen soon.
Yeah. To everybody who's listening right now, a reminder once again that this and all of these episodes are available on YouTube at youtube.com/LexBlog, and that we will be back next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific Time. And our guest next week is Lindsay Griffiths, author of the Zen and the Art of Legal Networking blog. So watch for that. This is Bob Ambrogi on behalf of LexBlog. Thanks for watching and listening. Have a good weekend, everybody.